All right, you guys, Scott Horton here. And on the line, I got Eric Schuler, and he's going to interview me for the Q&A show. I can't stand doing these podcasts where I just kind of talk to you guys and record it and put it out there. I need somebody to talk to. So I got Eric Schuler. He helps out around the Institute. How you doing, Eric?
Good. How you doing, Scott?
I'm doing real good, man. Appreciate you doing this. So what all are we talking about tonight?
Well, I was thinking to start off, we'd do a couple of housekeeping items. You're working on the new book, and I understand there's some crowdsourcing going on. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that and what the project is?
Yeah, we got this cool thing, man, where Tom Woods was always telling me to make this a private Facebook group. And I always thought, I don't want to do that, man. I hate Facebook. I quit that like 5 years ago almost. But so then I did it on Reddit instead. Oh, you did it. Created this great Reddit group, r/Scott Horton Show. And so any donor who is already donating $5, at least $5 a month, or begins donating $5 a month by way of PayPal or my Patreon, and that's scotthorton.org/donate for all that stuff. Anybody doing that, you get tickets to the, keys to the Reddit room. And then, so we decided that I had this great guy, Jonathan Coop, did a great job last time going back and listening through my old Afghanistan interviews for cool stuff to put in the book, and which was very useful to me and saved me a lot of time. It wasn't too bad of a chore for him since he was listening to the show anyway. So, and, listening to old stuff. So it was like, hey, well, why don't you focus on listening to old Afghanistan stuff for me? Okay, cool. So, but then the problem is the new book that I'm writing, and I know it's stupid. I don't know what I'm thinking. It's already too late to stop now, but
yeah,
I'm writing a book about Afghanistan. Oh, wait, well, the Iranian Revolution, the Iran-Iraq War, Iraq War I, Iraq War 1.5, the Al-Qaeda guys, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Yemen, Somalia, Libya, Syria, Mali. So, because I'm from Texas and I know everything about all this stuff.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So I'm working on that now, and what's happened is Andrew, a.k.a. Car Campit, and Eric, a.k.a. Bird, I almost forgot his a.k.a. Everyone has their internet name. Car Campit and Bird in the Reddit room are overseeing the project, running the project, and people are volunteering and signing up to go and listen to old interviews on whichever subjects and taking the notes. And then, those two guys are organizing all this stuff. So right now I've been writing a lot, and I've been taking a lot of notes from doing a lot of research and myself. And then now I'm cracking down and reading a bunch of books for like the next few weeks anyway. I mean, I can't overkill the whole thing to death, but I do have some reading to catch up on before I put this out. So I'm going to spend the next few weeks really crash coursing on reading a bunch of books, and then probably doing some follow-up interviews with those authors too. And I already read like 5 books this weekend, so getting a good start going. And then so I'm taking all those notes, and then at some point I'll go and integrate all that with the notes that my good friends in the Reddit room have taken too. So that way we'll have lots of footnotes about, interview with author and that kind of thing at the bottom. Make me look good. And and so it should be good. It'll be fool's errand only for the entire damn terror war is basically the point here. And there's, really almost, I wish I could say it, but it's just almost 4,900 interviews now. It's 4,870, 76, 78, something like that. I checked the other day. So that's a lot of interviews to go digging through. Almost 5,000 interviews, and almost all of them on foreign policy. So, and I don't want to completely overkill it. I mean, I think people know that unfortunately I'm going to end up ignoring a lot of the notes that they take and not using a lot of that stuff. I don't want to use it just to have footnotes that say I interviewed the guy. But a lot of times, almost every time my interviews are people who wrote stuff, and I might get more and better out of them in the interview than in the article that they wrote that we're talking about. But it depends, right? But, a lot of that stuff was good war reporting from the Hastings and the Enderses and the Patrick Coburns and all those great guys out there. So anyway, a lot to do still. And here's the other thing. Now we got Trump at least talking about getting out of Syria and Afghanistan. I guess we'll talk about that in a minute. But it looks like, hey, maybe I fished my wish and I better hurry. I want this book to really have a part in this debate right now. You know, when they say that there's a complete consensus that no, we have to stay everywhere forever. I want people, I mean, I guess not in D.C. and New York. They're not going to care. Powerful people aren't going to care, but at least regular people will be able to say that, no, man, you know what? In fact, there's this new book out about how, no, it's all BS and we could stop all of it and et cetera like that. And so that means I really want to get it out at least by the beginning of the summer, end of the spring, beginning of the summer. But I know from the last time around how difficult that's going to be. I mean, it's really not going to be possible, actually, now that I think about it. But I'm going to do everything I can to really rush it. And you know what? I was thinking even I might really rush it and just put out early versions of it and continue to update it and make it better, but let people criticize it for being half-baked, but go ahead and get it out there, depending on the time frame. Because if they really are pulling troops out and they really are fighting about it, and Trump starts talking about, I don't know why we're in Somalia either, then I gotta do it, as fast as I can.
Yeah, that's a lot of optimism talking.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Yeah, it sure is. I mean, the thing is I know that he's a cranky old bastard who never did understand why we were in Somalia in the first place. You don't have to be Ron Paul and have principle to just think, why are we in Somalia? Did I just say Afghanistan? I meant to say Somalia. Why are we in Afghanistan for that matter?
Yeah.
So anyway, I don't know, but at least they're fighting about it because as you saw and as we're going to discuss further, everybody completely freaked out over pulling out of Syria and Afghanistan, or at least the announcements that he made. So there's a huge fight to be had there. But also that means that my new strategy is I'm going to stack up and schedule all my interviews for Friday and just try to do 8 or 10 interviews every Friday. Because I can do that. It's not that hard as long as I have enough Dr. Peppers. But the problem is, but then that way I have more time in a row to write and really focus on getting this book out of the way as fast as I can.
That's great. And so if people want to take part in kind of the crowdsourcing of your bibliography, how would they go about that?
Yeah, so you just join up the Reddit group, or if you're already a member of the Reddit group, go and log in and look at the dang thing, and you'll see the top 2 pinned posts are about this. And, explain what all's going on and how to participate in it. And yeah, it's basically just, listen, blah, blah, blah. Horton's talking, and then he finally asks a question, and then the guy says something important, and then you write down at 3:30, he says, hey, look, Israelis, or whatever, I don't know.
Yeah, so you can keep up the mass, like the half of your book being a bibliography. I feel like that's part of your brand in books. If you do more of them, people are going to come to expect that.
Well, I wanted this to really be breezy and not have that. But then I recognized that, virtually every compliment that Fool's Errand got included that it's so well resourced that no one can say anything about it. So I kind of thought, you know what? I really better do that again. And that's pretty easy for me because it's easy for me to remember where I read stuff in the first place. So, you know what I mean? It's not hard for me to go back and find it and remember what's in there.
Yeah. And I think it does set you apart from, because I feel like a lot of foreign policy books are going to just be, Hannity making assertions or whoever, fill in the blank with your pundit.
Right.
Yeah.
Making claims. That's exciting.
And then it's like, even if they're right, it's like, okay, well, how'd you get there? And how do you separate yourself from, just silly posts that you see elsewhere? So it's really interesting. Well, with that, I guess let's just jump into the serious stuff. So there's 2,000 troops there, and Trump has announced that last couple weeks that he's going to pull them out. Kind of came out of the blue. seemed to take everybody by surprise. And I wonder if that's, sort of so that he couldn't have people front run him and try to, start dismantling the case before he just put it out there. Because I think there's kind of some precedent with that. And, I remember reading Swanson's book, The War State, and he talked about how Kennedy had to do that a few times. If he was going to make a big speech, he didn't want it getting leaked because then somebody would sabotage it. So he'd just, go out cold and no one would know what to expect. Do you think that's kind of Trump's strategy on this?
Yeah, except that he's right in his defense when he says that there was plenty of time that, he announced this a year ago. Remember last, I think January or February of 2018, the beginning of this year. He announced, we're leaving Syria as soon as we're done with ISIS. We're pulling out of there. And Rex Tillerson said, yeah, right, belay that order. Never mind what he says. What I say is, and what we all say, is we're there for Iran and for Hezbollah and for Russia and for ISIS and for Assad and for... I'm Barack Obama, and I approve this message. And then he got fired. And I don't think he actually got fired over that. I think he got fired over the, intervening to stop the war between Saudi and Qatar, thank God. So he didn't get fired for doing a horrible thing. He got fired for doing the right thing on that one, which makes sense.
Well, he also called him a moron. I thought it was just maybe just...
Yeah, well, I mean, that probably had a lot to do with, how he lost his job. But now remember... When he said that, that was when Erdogan said to Putin, see, they say they're staying for Iran. We hear they're embedding and building a mini state with the Syrian Kurds. And so watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill some Kurds. And Putin said, okay, go ahead, and pulled back his Russian airspace dominance over that region of northern Syria, and the Turks invaded, and with al-Qaeda shock troops, of course, al-Nusra guys leading the attack and sacked the town of Afrin. And I think the Kurds mostly withdrew, but at least, some were killed and war crimes were committed against some of the female fighters. Their bodies were desecrated and stuff, the Kurdish fighters, by the al-Qaeda guys. And this was a real, this really showed how seriously the Turks take the idea of the Americans staying embedded with the Syrian Kurds there. But now, for anyone who listened to my show, they weren't surprised by the idea. And we talked about this years ago, at the, in 2011, 2012, when this whole thing was just getting started, that at some point America's going to stab the Kurds in the back and realign with Turkey. I mean, at that point, we were already aligned with Turkey, but that we're always going to choose Turkey over the Kurds. And then when the Islamic State blew up out of control and took over Western Iraq, and they had to start the war all over again against the Islamic State that America and Turkey had just essentially worked to create, then America backed, embedded there with the Syrian Kurds in order to fight ISIS. And the whole time it was clear that they're going to be backstabbed and they're going to be left high and dry. And in fact, in Mark Perry's article for the American Conservative, it was originally titled General Scaparotti's Revenge. Well, General Scaparotti is the supreme allied commander for NATO in Europe. And his argument against James Mattis, which apparently got really heated back 6 months ago, was, hey, when are we going to tilt back toward the Turks here? They're our NATO allies since World War II, and the Kurds are just the Kurds. Some YPG, leftist militia guys. We don't need them. And Erdogan's getting antsy. So what the hell? So they portray this as just Trump versus the Pentagon, but that's not true. It's Trump and some generals versus other generals. And of course, to Mattis, the problem is... say it now. Iran, Iran, Iran. The top 3 threats in the region. Iran, Iran, Iran. Now, you might be, wondering when did they knock our towers down or something like that. But that's not James Mattis's concern. James Mattis is the guy who invaded Iraq and killed Saddam Hussein for George W. Bush, overthrew his government for the Ayatollah. Khamenei and Sistani and for Sadr, for Dawa and for Skiri. And so now he's trying to make up for it. James Mattis is the redirection, right? And so their idea is, so why do they back ISIS in the first place? To hurt Assad. Why? To hurt Iran. That was what, I always say this, Barack Obama told Jeffrey Goldberg. That's right, Jeffrey Goldberg. This would be a great way to bring Iran down a peg by getting a regime change against Assad. And so that was why America and Israel and Turkey and Saudi and Qatar backed the Al-Qaeda suicide bomber, head chopper, murderer terrorists in Syria for 5 years. Was I'm summing it up. First of all, for the first 3 years till it led to the rise of the Islamic State. Then they kept backing Al-Qaeda in the West as they fought the Islamic State in the East from 2014 through 18 here, to be clear.
So let's, to pull on one of those threads there, why does the U.S., well, some members of the U.S., I guess, why do they have a preference for Turkey over the Kurds in your view? Is it Incirlik, the air base there, or is it, I mean, they're in NATO and that's a lot of inertia, or what do you attribute that to?
Yeah, I think that's probably the biggest part of it, right? I remember Phil Giraldi joking on the show one time that like, hey, I don't know. And I think actually we were talking about the Iraqi Kurds at this point. Or no, maybe this was the Syrian Kurds that we were talking about. And Giraldi was joking that, hey, I don't know, man. The Kurds have oil. So we might just turn around and backstab the Turks and choose the Kurds over them. But no, it didn't pan out that way. But, I think they look at it like they don't want to lose Turkey to Russia is basically the deal, right? So they have to keep Turkey as a tight ally or else, because this is all some weird risk, zero-sum game where it matters either way, whether the Turks buy their weapons from the Russians or the Americans. Okay.
Do the Syrian Kurds, do they have a lot of oil resources, or is it just the
well, there's
Iraqi
oil
Kurds?
there. It's not all very well developed, and I'm not sure how developed it was before the war, but it's certainly not very well developed now. But there is some oil in the east of the country. Although, actually, that's a good question about whether it's south of Syrian Kurdistan. It's in the east, but I don't actually know whether it's up in the northeast.
Yeah, okay. Well, okay, so what about Mattis? So another thing you mentioned, Mattis's motivation is all about Iran, which we know that's been a long kind of stuck in his craw for a while. Do you think that's, to him, is that geopolitical strategy, grand chessboard type stuff, or is that just he blames Iran for killing some of his troops in Iraq? From the IED thing, and so it's going to be permanent from now on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. That's what Mark Perry said, was that these Marines are still not over Beirut in 1983, and then they blame Iran for 500 out of the 4,500 deaths of American soldiers and Marines in Iraq War II, when they did fight Shiite militias, some of whom were backed by Iran. But blaming Iran for that is, it's begging a lot of questions to set up an argument in that way. As I try to explain, and I think people are catching on to this, and it matters, that the government that America created for the Iraqis in Iraq War II was a joint project with Iran all along. Just because they weren't talking to each other because they hated each other so much didn't mean that they weren't working together to put the United Iraqi Alliance of the Supreme Islamic Council, the Dawa Party, and Muqtada al-Sadr in power in Baghdad, and for that matter to help Sadr's army and Skiri's army, the Badr Brigade, kick all the Sunnis out of Baghdad in a massive ethnic or sectarian cleansing campaign that ended up, in the Civil War that overall killed approximately 1 million people. And then at the end of the war, in the last 2 years of the war, in 2000, or the worst part of the fighting, in 2007 and 8, it became then a race for, now that we put this government in power, who's going to have more influence over it, America or Iran? And the Americans were led by George W. Bush, and so Iran won that contest big time. The American bet was that we have the money and the weapons, and so they're going to need us more. But, I mean, the reality was America had helped them kick all the Sunnis out of Baghdad. which was the Iranian policy to do that sectarian cleansing campaign. And so they didn't need our help anymore. They would have needed our help if they had really tried to dominate all of Western Iraq in a very harsh way. But they didn't. They basically just cut them loose. And they got their Shia stand, and they were happy with that, the ones that the Iranians had helped to put in power. So at the time that America, sorry I'm saying too much about it, but at the time that America was fighting Shiite militias there, and Iran was helping those Shiite militias, they were just making the point, basically, that now that you have helped to install this government in power here, to create this thing and build it up and build up the army, now you can go. Because, you know, at the end of the day, the people that you help put in power don't want you here. And they have this tight alliance with the government next door, so they don't need you here. And so that was a big part of that. But all of the Iranian help for the Shiite militias during that time was totally overblown. You know, obviously, and you mentioned the IEDs, that's improvised explosive device for you young kids who don't remember Iraq War II. You know, among the Shiites, they call them the EFPs, explosively formed penetrators, which had basically shaped charges with copper cores to cut through light armor. And these were really, you know, the Iraqis were manufacturing these with design help that they got from Hezbollah. So that's not even directly from the Iranians at all. And the accusation at the time was that all of these bombs were coming from Iran, but that was just a lie. And it was proven 50 times over or something, that those bombs were made in Iraq by Iraqis. And yes, Shia, but not Iranians. They were, you know, at no point did they say, aha, see, we caught a truck full coming across the border or anything like that. At one point, they laid them all out and had all these weapons, and they were going to do a big press conference to show how Iranian all these weapons were. And the reporters started milling around and looking at them and going, well, come on, man. I mean, even if that one says made in Iran, I mean, that doesn't really mean anything, you know? It's a big market out there. And they canceled the press conference and like pulled the curtain and drew the stuff back and didn't do it. That was their big shot, and they hyped it up, too, what a big deal it was going to be. They were going to show you. They were going to finally prove all their accusations. So,
and then they discovered Iraq has copper, too.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, an Arab can, you know, run a machine shop in a garage just like a Persian can. Who would have thunk it, you know? And then, and so there was this huge propaganda campaign basically blaming Iran for everything that had gone wrong in the war. But all that had happened in the war was that George Bush had done Iran's bidding the whole time. And they didn't make him do it. You know, from the invasion to staying to the sides, to the major factions that he sided with. And every bit of the El Salvador option and using the Shiite death squads to hunt down the leaders of the Sunni insurgency. And, you know, everything that he did was exactly what the Ayatollah probably would have not even asked him to go that far in doing, you know? And then Obama did the same thing, right? Obama supported the Sunni-based insurgency in Syria, which most Syrian Sunnis sided with the government, and most of the army enlisted and officers were Sunnis. So don't get me wrong, but it was the Al-Qaeda-led Sunni insurgency, such as it was in Syria. Obama did that, again, to spite Iran by hurting Assad, to try to make up for what Bush had done in Baghdad, essentially. But then again, what happened? It blew up so badly in the form of Baghdadi's Islamic State that then Obama had to launch Iraq War III, which was... I'm sorry for everybody for telling the same story every day. Every time anyone hears my voice, this is all I'm doing is saying... And then what happened? America took the side of Iran's pet Shiite militias again. Asayb al-Haq, that's just the Badr Brigade, you know? And they did Iraq War III was just a repeat of Iraq War II. America on the side of the Shiite supermajority again to rouse the Islamic State out of the predominantly Sunni cities there in the West and help to, you know, establish and entrench Iranian power in Iraq even further than before. And then now back to the beginning. Why do we have to stay in Syria, they say? Because Iran's there. Why is Iran there? to help defend the Syrian state against the CIA's Al-Qaeda terrorists. And so the Islamic State is no longer a state at all. It's nothing but the remnants of a militia. At this point, the Americans are actually standing between the Syrian state and what's left of ISIS. And if America would just go and let Assad reestablish his territorial monopoly on the country, and with the help of his Iranian and Hezbollah and Iraqi militia friends, America's friends when they're on the Iraqi side of the line, finish them off, then they'll be finished off, and that'd be that. Everyone's saying, oh no, ISIS isn't 100% defeated there. Lindsey Graham, that's the big article today. Lindsey Graham saying, oh, but ISIS isn't 100% defeated, so we can't leave too soon. But then he says, who else is the beneficiary? Assad and Iran and Hezbollah and Russia. ISIS's enemies, right? The people who America is essentially protecting. And I say essentially because I don't mean to say that Trump has American soldiers deliberately protecting ISIS on the ground, but I do mean that the Syrian army ain't allowed east of the Euphrates River. And so they can't get there to fight because that's the American don't cross this line because this is where we are zone or whatever, you know? So if America would just get out of the way, the war against ISIS would be over. And then if you don't like it that Iran benefited from the war, well, then that's your fault for backing Al-Qaeda against them in the first place. These things happen. I don't want to hear it.
So let's go to the protection argument, because I do hear that, you hear that claim pretty frequently, that the U.S. is protected. And, it depends on the context, how careful and nuanced somebody's going to be when they say that. But the idea there is essentially that, the U.S. has 2,000 troops officially. Who knows if that's the real number or not? And they probably have more special forces than that, too, because those are never counted, right? Is that probably a safe assumption?
Oh, yeah. You know what? I don't know if special operations forces count in the count there. Probably not. I agree with you. Yeah, they're probably left out of the count.
Sneakers, not boots.
Yeah, and you know what? There was just an article in Politico. I tried to get the guy on the show, but he never answered me. But it was about this giant base that they were building out there. And I forgot how many troops he said were there. Which, by the way, there's this article in the Daily Beast. It's Kimberly Dozier. I don't respect her at all. Spencer Ackerman, I respect his journalism in some ways, I guess. But, this seemed to add up to me that the way they put it was that Bolton had pushed it too far. That Bolton and this guy Jeffries, you might remember we talked about this on some of the shows, that this guy, James Jeffries, was saying, oh, no, we're never leaving. We're there for Iran. We're there for Hezbollah. We're there for Israel's interests. We're there no matter what. And nobody can ever say a thing. And then Bolton, earlier this month, the beginning of December, had also made a statement that as long as Iranian forces are outside of Iran's borders, which is pretty vague, right? Like, does that mean as long as they have advisors in Iraq too?
Boats on the sea.
Huh?
Boats on the sea.
Yeah, exactly. As long as Iran has forces outside Iranian borders, then we are staying in Syria. And apparently that was when Trump said no. You know what? Actually, I already argued with you guys and already, conceded that, okay, you got another 6 months. You got another 6 months. Well, your last 6 months is up now. And, stuck to that. Which just goes to show to me, really, I think the most important point here, too, is just, and it remains to be seen whether Donald Trump follows through, by the way. I don't want to give him too much credit. It's not over yet. But it just goes to show what a coward Barack Obama is. I never understood this. It's not like I think he's a good guy, but I think he's smart enough to know better than a lot of these things. And yet he always just said yes to them anyway. Like even on Syria, he wants to take credit for not literally putting Ayman al-Zawahiri on the throne in Damascus when that was what all of Washington, D.C. wanted him to do. And he said, you know what, man, I don't want to go that far. Let them take the East, but I'm scared of giving them the West to the country. What's going to happen? Something like that. But he wants a bunch of credit for being afraid to fully implement his horrible treason when all he had to do was tell them, hell no. You know what? I know that you guys are all upset about Iran, but guess who I'm upset about? Bin Laden and his buddies still. They're the problem. Bin Ladenite militias, the remnants of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Our only priority in the Middle East is keeping them down. And waging a regime change against Assad doesn't fit with that. So sorry. Who's the superpower? And who's the satellite here? Or am I talking about Israel or Saudi or what? Either way. Anyway.
Well, I think you started talking just about the generals. That he wouldn't, everybody, the blob.
The blob. The think tanks.
The blob.
And I guess I started off, too, thinking about Afghanistan, where they really rolled him, and he escalated the war by, 70,000 troops. We had 30,000. He had another 70,000 troops over 2009 and to start 2010. And then with, they badgered NATO into come up with another 40,000, although they didn't do much. But, he tripled that war. And he knew better all along. And he made sure to tell people, hey, for the record, I know better all along. And then he did it anyway. They're making me do it. Like that made it look like it wasn't his fault. When he's the president, and as Trump is finding out, he's the president. If he says, all of y'all go to hell, this is what my orders are, then that stands. And, it came down, I show this in the book from other sources, not that it's my original journalism, but I linked to I sourced to the people who reported this story that, Obama had said he was afraid that Robert Gates, the Secretary of Defense, George Bush's Republican Secretary of Defense that he kept, he was afraid that he would resign and that David Petraeus and General McChrystal would resign as well. Psh, are you kidding me? I would have laughed him right out the damn door. And how could anybody actually be the president and then exercise so little authority when it comes to such important things? And it would have been good politics too. It would have been good politics, not bad politics, to have this fight and to win this fight back then, and to be seen as a leader who is willing to stand up in the way that people are giving Trump credit right now. Everybody's trying to stop him. He's doing it anyway. Apparently, supposedly, we hope. If he backs down, it'll be the greatest shame. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. It is interesting about Obama, too, just because, he had that line and it was always used in like a domestic political context of something invariably bad that he wanted to do on the home front. Almost invariably. Elections have consequences. And it's like, why couldn't you just, you ran as I'm not the complete pawn of empire like everybody else who tried to run here, excepting Kucinich and Gravel and whatever. But he ran as that guy. So how could you not, I'm going to be afraid that Bush's Secretary of Defense is going to resign if I do something anti-war? How is that? It doesn't.
And look at
sense.
who's his biggest critic in the Senate was John McCain, who he soundly defeated. So why not just continue to make a foil out of John McCain? Why not give a speech and say, look, I defeated John McCain by 10 points, in a landslide a year ago because the American people decided they didn't want him to make this call. They preferred that I do. And because they could have anticipated that he'd be screaming his head off saying we got to triple the war, but I'm not going to do that. And sorry, Senator McCain, but you'll never be president, dude. So fuck off, That's what I would have said. I should censor that part.
So let's get back to that started at the 2,000 troop thing. I want to drill in on that a little bit. So when people say that, the U.S. is functionally protecting ISIS in there, it's basically just that the U.S. only has 2,000 troops. So even if they are actively campaigning against the small residual ISIS presence there, just because of the the minimal manpower, it's not going to be as aggressive of a campaign as what the Syrian military would be able to do now that they've consolidated power elsewhere. Is that basically the idea?
Yeah, and you know what? I haven't been following it nearly close enough very recently, but I think that, you know, they were basically said to be kind of just out in the desert, licking their wounds and trying to survive in small groups and that kind of thing. But then I think I also read that they retook some small town, at least for a little while there in East Syria. So there's still, I don't know, hundreds or low thousands there. And I'm not exactly certain. They call it the SDF now because it's not just the YPG Kurdish forces, although my understanding is they do all the work. And the Arabs are there basically mostly for window dressing, working in their same militia. But I don't know the status of, I mean, it seems like they called that off. Special Operations Forces and Kurdish YPG out there hunting down and killing the last Al-Qaeda forces. It seems like they called that off at some point in the recent past, but I don't know when.
Do you mean Al-Qaeda there, or do you mean ISIS?
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, I meant ISIS there. Because all the Al-Qaeda guys are in the Idlib province in the far northwest of the country. That's a separate problem.
Right, okay. And so right now you think your understanding is that they were sort of just kind of holding pat and not really engaging, but not, just kind of preserving the status quo as it was?
Yeah, and I mean, I assume they're still hunting with drones. And, there's a separate, they call it the New Syrian Army, this separate, so-called moderate group that was down in southeast Syria, operating out of Jordan, some CIA patsy dudes. And then they were supposed to be fighting ISIS, but they weren't. And then they fled to Idlib just the other day. They took off and went to join up with the Al-Qaeda guys in the northwest. So I think they don't have enough troops to fight them with right now. They don't have enough auxiliaries. And now looks like the Syrian Kurds have their own problem. Oh, so let's talk about this real quick. Is that everybody's saying that Trump is selling out the Kurds and is leaving them to all be butchered by the Turks. Well, I mean, first of all, do we have no leverage over the Turks, our NATO ally? They act like, again, they're the empire and America's the satellite. And, we desperately need them. Wherever would we be if they bought their anti-aircraft missiles from Russia instead of us? That would bankrupt our whole economy, or, our entire strategy of global dominance would unravel, or, I don't know. It just seems all very hyperbolic the way that they approach all this as far as, what's at stake.
It is an amazing argument that I think there's different threads of why pulling out of Syria is such a horrible idea. And it seems like they're just, they try each one on until, it runs out of cachet, and then they move on. But the Turkey one, but it is a real concern,
right? I mean, Erdogan does want to fight the YPG. He's worried about the YPG. But there's a simple solution, which is you just let the Syrian army take that territory back over again. And that's the top headline on antiwar.com right now, is that they're making a deal. The Syrian Kurds and the Assad government are making a deal to bring the Syrian Arab army in. So America absolutely should use its influence with Russia and Turkey and whatever influence they have in Damascus to say, yeah, here's our peaceful solution. The YPG's done a great job fighting ISIS, but they don't need to do that anymore. The Syrian Arab army and their Hezbollah and Iranian and Russian allies will finish taking care of ISIS, but the Syrian Arab army will, occupy the border and a space there to reassure the Turks that they have nothing to fear from the Syrian Kurds, and that the Syrian Kurds will then, disarm as a military force and rejoin the Syrian state. And in this whole civil war, the Syrian Kurds have had autonomy and, somewhat independence, but they never declared war on Assad. They never backed Assad. All the stories about DOD-backed fighters fighting CIA-backed fighters, CIA-backed terrorists, Al-Qaeda terrorists backed by the CIA, versus these Kurds fought by the DOD. So they never had that problem with Assad. So there's every reason to think that this is the solution, and everybody ought to, America ought to lean on everybody as hard as they can. And Trump's in the position that he should make sure his government leans on the rest of these governments as hard as they can to say that's the solution. Let's see, the American, everyone else in D.C., they want to throw a conniption. You hear them saying, oh, you see who benefits from this? Assad and Iran and Russia and ISIS. They act like ISIS is on the same team with these other guys. One of these things is not the same, but the way they chant it out like that, but these groups have every interest in resolving the Islamic State problem for us. And if America, even right now, if the Turks do invade, the idea, I guess, is that they'll use al-Nusra guys to do it, like they did in Afrin a year ago, right? Where they're not going to send in the Turkish army. They're going to send in a bunch of terrorists, because that's right. America and Turkey have been on the side of the terrorists all this time. Or, not all this time. Trump actually called off support for the terrorists. And, Turks, that was in the summer of 2017. A year and a half ago, Trump called off support for these guys. But Erdogan still keeps them, in the Idlib province. They're basically under Turkish protection there. And he used them as shock troops a year ago. So they seem to be under Turkish control to a great degree. So
if, under the deal that you're talking about of the Syrian army kind of retaking the territory that's currently under the Kurds, so Turkey's concern primarily, it's not that, some wipe, I guess they'd probably like to wipe them out if they could, just because they view them all as terrorists. But if they didn't actually hold territory, they're just concerned about having a border state that's run by Kurds. But short of that, the theory is that they would be willing to accept it. Is that kind of the idea?
Well, I would hope so. What do they have to fight about if the YPG is not helping the PKK in Turkey wage a campaign against the Turkish state? Then, hey, be cool, man.
And I think
why pick a fight if you don't have to? And doesn't Russia agree with that? Russia put out a statement saying that they support this. They think it's great that the Syrian Kurds are talking with Assad. So it seems like, for their part, they have a lot of influence with Turkey as well.
Mm-hmm. And did the Syrian Kurds they didn't have like the Iraq level autonomy that the Kurds there have? Did they have like semi-autonomy, or were they really just a kind of another province of Syria before the war?
Before the war, they were, I'm not exactly sure about their relationship with Assad, but the Syrian Arab Army was there, and they were part of the Syrian state before the war. And then, Assad just had bigger fish to fry in the west of the country. So he withdrew his troops to fight against, the American-backed jihadists and let them go. But they never had a fight with him the whole time. So should be plenty of opportunity for them to come back together again. Come on. They were going to have Rojava, the free anarcho-syndicalist, utopian little project there in the land adjacent to Turkey, where you have this strongman, right-wing leader, Erdogan, who, not just has a problem with the PKK, but likes to pick a fight with the PKK when he can, right? He launched a big attack against them in, 2014 or 2015 against the PKK, mostly apparently just to marginalize their political party before the upcoming parliamentary elections, to solidify support for his coalition. And, because their votes would have gone toward the other guys. And so he launched a giant attack against them. And, seemingly unnecessarily from what I saw, they didn't really predict it with provoke it with a big bombing campaign against terrorist bombing campaign or anything like that before that. I think he took advantage of some incident to launch a major crackdown there. So the Syrian Kurds, they had to know that they were having their fun for a little while there. Not that fun, all militarized and fighting the whole time. But They got to have their independence, but that was never going to last. And, I hate to be such a doomsayer for the poor Kurds. This has been an issue for a long time under the Ottomans and, since World War I and everything. Whatever's going to become of the Kurds, because you have, all these different political factions, but you have, essentially one big ethnic region that's pentasected. It's Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and then also even including parts of Azerbaijan and Armenia up there. So how many is that? And so you have all of these sovereign states who will not give an inch. None of them are going to actually allow an independent Kurdistan. That would necessarily mean redrawing their maps at their expense. All of these national governments that already exist. Iran, Iraq, Syria, Turkey would go to war first, of course. So the Kurds are just stuck.
And the only country that actually backs like independent Kurdistan movements is just Israel, because they want to.
Yeah,
they
just because it's destabilizing.
Yeah, but no major power is ever gonna. It doesn't seem like any major power is going to do that. Although it is interesting, I'm kind of surprised that the U.S. doesn't do it with respect to the Iranian part of Kurdistan. Because it seems like that would just. Well,
America has supported PJAK there, and they're basically the Iranian branch of the PKK.
And is the YPG just the Syrian branch of the PKK? Are they all? I mean, I know I've heard Coburn say this before on your show, or Patrick Coburn say this before on your show, that they kind of they worship the same. Or worship's probably the wrong word, but they look up to the same leader. So they really are kind of the same.
Well, I don't know a whole lot about PJAK, but yes, the YPG and the PKK, I think, are all led by Öcalan, is their leader. And he's the guy who, curiously and interestingly, I think, said, hey guys, we're no longer Marxists. Now we're Bookchinists. So everybody read Murray Bookchin. And he was, this anarcho-syndicalist writer from Brooklyn, I think. And, the Rothbard circle of people in New York certainly knew him back then. And so he's kind of a post-Marxist, more freedom-oriented anarcho-leftist type. And that's who they were trying to emulate. Now, in Iraq, it's always been the Talibani and Barzani clans that rule Iraq, and they're not related to the PKK. And I think Talibani just died recently, and Barzani is still the one alive. But there are PKK hiding in the Iraqi mountains that the Turks bomb from time to time, but they don't have the political power there. But the PKK, I believe, are the biggest political force among the Turkish Kurds and among the Syrian Kurds by far. Now, in Turkey, they have a civilian political party, but it's still the offshoot of their militant group. Sinn Féin to their IRA kind of thing. Okay.
So another thing that's interesting about this, so we've kind of gone through one of the reasons, walked through one of the reasons that the pullout is being objected to, which is we have to stop our NATO ally from invading, so we need a tripwire, which is interesting on itself that's how we think otherwise our ally will invade against our wishes. It seems like a funny thing to call them an ally still then.
Right.
But so that's one of them. And then, so you mentioned how everybody's saying this is somehow simultaneously going to benefit both sides of the remaining conflict, which is Russia and Syria and, Iranian proxies on one side and then ISIS on the other side.
And what they really mean is that first part. Right. And it's all about Israel, and they're not even being shy about it at all. I mean, the New York Times editorial says, hey, this is bad for Israel. And the Washington Post editorial says, hey, this is bad for Israel. And in Haaretz, they got, I don't know if you read this thing by Chemi Shalev. He's an interesting national security beat reporter for Haaretz. And, had done interesting stuff about the nuclear deal and stuff back in Obama years. And man, he wrote this just raving thing, just cursing Netanyahu because Netanyahu was taking Trump's side and saying, our good friend Trump has announced he's pulling out of Syria. Isn't that great, everybody? Through clenched teeth. And And Chemi Shalev is saying, oh, yeah, see, you got the symbolic move of the embassy to Jerusalem. But when it really comes to Israeli security, Donald Trump sells us out, and Netanyahu, he's no leader. He doesn't stop him from selling us out. So they're taking it really hard. And in fact, in the few weeks, I have the footnotes here. I've been saving them. In the few weeks before Trump announced this, there were editorials saying, why are we staying in Syria? Because that's what Israel wants. And this was in Haaretz. This was in the Israeli papers saying Netanyahu's fingerprints are all over this policy. That was a headline. Why are we staying there? And if you listen to them, they say, again, because of Iran. Again, that's why America backed the Sunni jihadist terrorists in the first place, was against to try to hurt the Shiite axis, the Iranian Shiite alliance in the region that Israel hates. And so now that Iran has benefited, of course, from that policy, and there are more Iranians literally on the ground there and more Iranian power and influence, figuratively speaking, in Syria than ever before. Well, now you can't leave now because look at the hole that we've dug. You got to keep digging. And, that's basically the answer. Right? Why should Americans care at all whether, Hezbollah has gained battlefield experience from the fight Obama picked with them? I mean, is that a good enough excuse to say that now we have to fight them since Obama picked a fight with them and lost it? That now we have to start it over again? I mean, the whole thing is crazy. Donald Trump has picked a good time to call it off. I think, and any reasonable person, like we were talking about before, with Donald Trump, not even reasonable. You could be any person and just say, you know what, this has all been going on for too long. And apparently our best expert generals can't figure out how to tie up all the loose ends at a reasonable price in a reasonable time frame here. We're going to fight a war on terrorism forever, and half the time we're going to be fighting literally for the bin Ladenites, and half the time for their Iranian enemies, and then start all over again. And we're going to keep doing this from now on, fighting on both sides of this stupid war. I mean, it's crazy, the whole thing. So to call it off now is actually perfect. That, you know what, as soon as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are defeated, why would Syria want Iran to stay after that? Thanks a lot for the help, guys. You can go home now, right? Assad isn't trying to turn his country into some completely, Iranian-controlled puppet protectorate, and nor do they have the influence to do so to him. I don't think they would even try that. I'm sure he owes them a beer or whatever. They're all friends now more than before. Hezbollah, again, has a lot more, many more battlefield experienced mid-level commanders than they had. But, I mean, that's just tough. And if that's the worst consequence of the war, that the Syrian state still stands as compared to having Abu Muhammad al-Jawlani or Ayman al-Zawahiri sitting on the throne in Damascus, killing everyone for being a Druze or a Christian, then I think that should be good enough for everyone. And isn't it something where, Brett Stevens had a thing in the New York Times that Philip Weiss highlighted, where he's just talking about going on and on and on about how bad this decision is for Israel. And then he says in there that, it's a horrible, anti-Semitic trope to say that he or anyone else puts the interests of a foreign state first, like Israel. That's not true. It's just that that's exactly what he's doing, and that's exactly what he's saying. He can't come up with reasons why this should matter to Americans other than, whoa, we're hurting our ally. But we're hurting our ally because our previous government's conspiracy with that ally to support the Al-Qaeda terrorist suicide bomber head choppers didn't pan out? Huh? So what?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. the Syria thing, more than perhaps any other conflict, it's one of the most interesting ones to try to have a coherent discussion about, because there's just so many, it's so hard to argue for intervention, because it's like, well, which part of the intervention do you want? Because there's so many different parts that it could be doing. So I have
I should clarify too, because people will say, hey, listen, all they did was back the moderates. But the fact is, the moderates were just the gun runners and the cash receivers for the terrorists virtually the whole time. And the guys that the Americans would train up, this militia, that militia, this militia, that militia, for years. And those guys would all just go and join Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The dollars were fungible, the guns were fungible, and the fighters were fungible. And no, they are not all Islamist, far right-wing crazies. As I understand it, and as I always, explain it, bin Ladenism is, dressed up in religiosity the same way as George W. Bushism was, in a sense. And I'm sure he's a pious, true believer and all that, and a lot of his people are. But it's a political movement, and they are political radicals. And there are all kinds of hardcore right-wing fundamentalist religious people in every sect, all different sects of Muslims, but all different sects of Christians and Hindus and whoever too, who are quietists, who have hardcore religious beliefs, but who do not make part of that political resistance in the present that they live in.
And that goes the other direction too, right?
Yeah.
That you have people that wouldn't have radical...
Right, exactly right. Is you have people who are not necessarily religious kooks, but who absolutely are political radicals and are willing to fight like hell. And that goes for some of the, 9/11 hijackers. And and I show this in my book, and I have footnotes to all the different studies in my book by the different intelligence agencies in Europe, the Israelis and the Americans, the Defense Science Board, appointed by Donald Rumsfeld to study this. This is political radicalism that we're dealing with. Now, the Salafism and the Takfiriness and all of this, it somewhat plays into it, but it's not the end all. But, the jihadists were war criminals. So if CIA has the military train up a guy who seems reasonable in Jordan, and then he goes off to fight for al-Nusra, which is led by al-Jilani, Zawahiri's guy, then these are the war criminals that attack the United States.
Right.
I don't care about their religious sames. It's somebody is joining up, quite deliberately joining up a group that literally attacked us, not just figuratively, like they're always saying about Iran is the greatest sponsor of terrorism in the world. No details are available. Just repeat that slogan a few times, Al-Qaeda actually did attack us over and over again. It was the worst part of the Sunni insurgency that killed 4,000 out of 4,500 guys that died in Iraq War II fighting them. So,
now, when you say that, I guess the other thing, now you would agree with the idea that there was some organic kind of democratic movement in Syria that's part of the Arab Spring, and it just got very quickly co-opted, right? That's sort of how my understanding of how it worked. And so it's not that everybody who was protesting Assad didn't have legitimate reasons and was, trying to be a violent terrorist
Right, it's
type.
a fascist dictatorship.
Yeah,
And
there's
it
lots
was.
of reasons to oppose.
You know what, though? So here's the thing about it. David Enders is a reporter, and, I lost touch with him. I don't know what happened to him. I saw he was writing for Vice a few years ago. But anyway, I used to talk with David Enders all the time. And he covered Iraq War II and did a great job on Iraq War II. He covered Libya, did a great job on Libya. And he covered the revolution in Syria in the early years. I was talking with him 2011, 12, 13, I guess. I'm not exactly sure. Right in there. And so one of the things that was very true about Iraq War II and was an important point about Iraq War II was that George Bush and his government claimed that all Iraqi resistance, which was predominantly the Sunni-based insurgency in Anbar and in the west of the country and in Baghdad, that these were terrorists. right? They weren't there. There were no Iraqi local patriot militiamen who were grabbing their rifles to go defend from foreign invasion. There wasn't even a sectarian battle where the previously privileged were now losing status and had something to fight about. Nope, it was terrorists versus humanity. They came from beyond the moon. Nobody knows where they are. They're not Iraqis. They're just terrorists. And in fact, there were a lot of terrorists that came from around the region, from Saudi and from Syria and whoever, and who fought with Zarqawi and who quite deliberately used, and that's the leader of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. He didn't actually join Al-Qaeda until the end of 2004, a year and a half into the war, but he did. They did use terrorist attacks and massacred Shiite civilians in suicide bombings and attacked their mosques and waged a massive, terrorist sectarian war against the Shiites. So that much was true. But they were the smallest part of the Sunni insurgency. And good reporters like David Enders would always make that distinction and say the government blames every bombing on Zarqawi, but that's not what's going on here. You have these major factions of the former Iraqi army, the Ba'athist military officer corps, the tribal leaders from these major cities in the west of the country. And all of these factions have so much at stake. And then for the Americans, it was this convenient talking point that, terrorists, when they were really the smallest part of the insurgency. They were a big problem, but they were not the majority of it. Whereas then in Syria, David Enders on my show saying, look, Al-Qaeda is the largest part of the Sunni insurgency here. They are dominant here. And there are other groups, but, essentially the moderates don't fight. Moderates sit on their asses at a hotel in Qatar and tell Hillary Clinton how smart she is and can they have some money now, while it's the extremists who are doing the fighting here. And this is not a foreign invasion occupation by the USA or something like that. This is an attack against the status quo government there. And so it doesn't have that same kind of force behind it among the local population to just rise up in war. Rise up in protest, sure, but then, go to war against the army, no. And of course, I think it should be said, I guess, just to show I ain't, trying to hide nothing or whatever. I'm not on Assad's side here. I'm only on the side of the truth. So his government probably overreacted in a lot of ways to the original attacks, which were started by the jihadists. But they overattacked in a way that probably played into their enemies' hands there. Internationally and domestically in terms of support for these guys and made matters worse as far as that goes. But what it really was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which had started calling itself the Islamic State of Iraq in 2006 and had been almost completely marginalized out of existence by the Sunni insurgency that they had allied themselves with. After they helped the Sunni insurgency lose the civil war to the Shia, they were probably more harm than good on the Sunni side of that war. And the Sunni tribal chiefs and the Ba'athist military guys turned on them and eliminated them almost completely. And
that was in 2009 or so?
Yeah. Beginning really in 2006. And then David Petraeus showed up at the front of the parade in 2007 and called it the Awakening and gave them some money to keep it up and said, stop attacking us and we'll stop attacking you. And we'll give you guns and money, but you promise to eliminate the Al-Qaeda guys, which they were already doing. Because the leadership of Al-Qaeda in Iraq were a bunch of Egyptians and Saudis and so forth. So they were coming and trying to push the local Sunni population of Iraq around, but they weren't used to living like Saudis. And it was a very advanced society there. You had women with no hat, in blue jeans teaching college in Baghdad. For real, is how it was there. Not every place, but yeah, it was a very advanced, westernized type Arab society before America broke it. And so the leadership of Al-Qaeda, well, imagine, they're about the pushiest bastards you ever met. And so the local people just got sick and tired of them and started shooting and killing them. And so then Obama came like the devil out of like their guardian angel and just came and saved them. And this whole operation that he had the CIA coordinate with all of the regional allies, the Sunni kings there and the Israelis and the Turks to do this, to support these guys in this horrific war. You know, it's funny, man, because time goes by so fast, and the older you get, the faster it goes. And so it all kind of gets truncated together, where you had a few years of war before that led to the rise of ISIS. And then we had to fight ISIS, all the same story I keep telling. But if you notice on TV, when they talk about this, they never tell the story. They don't have a coherent narrative, because their narrative always was Assad is the bad guy and the terrorists are the good guys. And then they never really had a coherent story about how come if the terrorists are the good guys, ISIS are the bad guys. And, well, that was just because of that beheading video or something, right? But they don't have a narrative about whose side who's on, you know? And so, like we were saying before, I think a lot of these news people, they don't even realize they're lying when they say, repeating the talking point, Russia, Iran, Assad, and ISIS, they all benefit, you know, as though ISIS is on their side in the fight. They don't even know the difference. They don't even know the narrative about it. So why are we there? To fight ISIS. Okay. But then nobody says, well, why is ISIS there? Well, because the CIA project got a little out of hand, you see, and it was okay when they were creating a Salafist principality in the East, as the DIA warned in 2012. But when it blew back into Iraq, yeah, that was going too far. In Iraq, America's still on the side of the Shiites. Nobody knows why. I guess just because they can't admit that they wish they hadn't done that. And so they're still there.
Yeah, it's understandable why you would want to ignore that story, because it's complicated, and it takes more than 30 seconds to tell it.
Yeah, and, you know, to them, time is still moving on, and so maybe it's not over yet. Maybe they can still hope to buy that power and influence and exploit Iraqi resentment against Iranian domination and whatever, and try to wedge their way back in there somehow. So that's a never-ending contest to still try to compete with Iran for influence when that ship really, I think, has sailed. And in fact, you know, when Trump came and gave his speech about, yeah, we might just stay in Iraq so we can bomb Syria from there, Muqtada al-Sadr came out and said, get out, and demanded that all his political representatives insist that Iraq War III is over now. And for that matter, Iraq War III.5 is over now too. Beat it. And so we'll see how it goes. That worked when they did that to Bush and Obama. They had no choice but to leave. And I think Trump hopefully will say, you know what? I'll tell you what, Muqtada, as long as you keep ISIS down, then what do I care? You know, why should he care?
Yeah. So a couple follow-ups on this serious stuff, and then maybe we'll move on to the Afghanistan piece. So from the Empire's, you know, the blob's perspective, if you will, Brett Stevens and whoever, so I just can't wrap my head around this part. So they have 2,000 troops there, but everybody agrees that's not, you know, because their end game, when they say they think it's bad for Israel, is because Israel would like Syria to be overthrown. But 2,000 troops, they're not even theoretically working on that. They're not, you know, they're obviously not trying to do that right now. So it's the idea of why they would be so hell-bent on having them stay that, well, if you have 2,000 there, then maybe it's easier to escalate and you could get back to the, like, let's go overthrow Assad plan? Or,
well, no, I think, no, the troops aren't meant to be used against Assad directly, but the way that they phrase it is that the Iranians are building a land bridge, which is otherwise known as a road, and that they'll be able to travel nonstop through Iraq, never mind who got rid of Saddam Hussein for them, and they'll be able to go through Shiite-dominated Iraq and into still, again, Shiite-dominated, Shiite Alawite Ba'athist, allied with Iran, dominated Syria, to Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and could give missiles to Nasrallah. And the thing is, so they already have airplanes, and Iran has been arming Hezbollah since the early 80s when it was created by local Shiites in reaction to Israel's invasion and occupation of that country. So what the hell difference does it make if there's a land bridge or not?
So
and isn't it funny the way...
Yeah.
They could just
So that's
get
the real
people to
reason?
repeat that and say land bridge. I mean, you'll hear that all the time. Well, they're building a land bridge. Well, who told you that you have to say it like that? Where does that come from? And you know what? I was reading Barton Gellman's book about Dick Cheney today, and he says Saddam Hussein was pulled out of a hole. And I was like, sweet. Barton Gellman didn't call it a spider hole. He just called it a hole. Congratulations, Barton Gellman, for not calling it a spider hole. You must not have got the memo that you have to call it a spider hole or apparently they'll kill you or something. Same as you have to call the land bridge through Syria a land bridge or else.
I mean,
I'm not sure or else what. Or else they won't drink with you at the cocktail party. You won't get the fat weapons contract. I don't know or else what.
So do you think that's the real argument for why they're pissed about having 2,000 troops? It just seems. I mean, I
that's what they
why
say.
It would be a talking.
Yeah.
Okay,
that somehow this can be used to limit Iran. But you're right if your complaint is that they're not being very specific about what they mean by that. You know.
Well, it's just so. I mean, I realize a lot of these arguments are stupid, but that's dumber than normal, isn't it?
Well, look, man, everything they have done has been a massive failure and backfiring catastrophe. And they can't ever admit it. And so they can't ever call it off. But at this point, I mean, they don't even have an argument of which way to double down. I mean, I think that's your frustration, right? Is that they're out of excuses. Their only excuse is that there are Iranians right there on the other side of the river who aren't messing with them. And who are only there because America backed the bad guys there in the first place, the bad guys who are now almost all dead thanks to those same Iranians. And, you know, like I was saying, now's the perfect time to call this off if you're an American. But if you're an Israel first neocon traitor, then no, Iran has now a greater presence in Syria. And that's bad for Israel. And so we really don't know what should be done, but something should be done. We can't leave it like this.
Then Iran could have cheaper transportation, theoretically, if they built a road across the massive desert to deliver rockets to Hezbollah so that it could prevent Israel from invading.
And you know what? America and Saudi can still back the Sunni-based insurgency in Iraq. You know, Saudi's been backing them since 2003. So, no, I'm being sarcastic there. I mean, that's true, but it's horrible.
Well, and then, okay, so just the last thing here. When you say, because I know we say this a lot, and it's kind of counterintuitive, so just to pin it down. You know, when we say that Iran benefited from the U.S. Syrian policy, essentially what we mean by that is that we gave them a pretext. Well, we made Assad dependent on Iran and Hezbollah to try to repel repel the Al-Qaeda types. And so so it's not necessarily that like, oh, war's good for people that fight in it. It's just that it's helpful to Iran because it caused their relationship to strengthen and gave them a pretext to be there more.
Right. And they have, you know, I think low thousands of troops there on the ground. Quds Force and Revolutionary Guard Corps guys. And then, like I say, Hezbollah has been fighting them. You know, Donald Trump at one point met with the Lebanese president and he goes, congratulations on your recent defeat of the terrorist groups, ISIS and Hezbollah. But it was Hezbollah that defeated ISIS. Hezbollah, that's part of the elected government of Lebanon.
Maybe for the Hezbollah party meant like they played chess together or something.
I mean, it just goes to show that, and that's the level of understanding our president has. He is just as misled as your right-wing Uncle Bob on your email list there about what the hell's going on here and who is who. And yeah, that's a real problem. And you know what, too? I was thinking this as I was working on my book today, as I'm sitting here reading Barton Gellman's book about the Cheney years and stuff, picking up some torture footnotes and so forth. And I'm thinking, I really am fighting the last war here. You know, like the terror war ain't over. I mean, the book is it's a short history of the terror war that's been fought and why we ought to call it off now, all of it. So that's good and everything. But I'm thinking, man, I'm spending a lot of time on the past. Even the recent past here is still the past, and there's still plenty of problems coming this way too. So I don't know. I'm feeling like I really need to hurry and move on, you know?
Yeah. What do you think about the other complaint I've seen is Trump's not listening to his generals. And you mentioned that really some generals would be in favor of this, some generals wouldn't be. But when they really mean it, they mean Mattis. And Trump didn't even consult Mattis before he decided what he was going to do. What do you? It's so funny that, so the commander in chief, he needs to definitely, I don't know. How do you parse that, I guess?
Well, I mean, it comes down a lot, pardon me, to the character of the president. I think with Bush and Trump, you have the whole thing of they're completely ridiculous dummies. And then with Obama, you have he's weak and he's a Democrat and he's a liberal and he's soft. That same kind of accusation against Bill Clinton even, draft dodger, pothead, kind of thing. So then the idea is that, contrary to that, on the other hand, who's more respectable than a general? Generals, man, they wake up at like 4 a.m. and then they comb their hair real nice and then they wear real like sharp seams on their clothes and they boss people around all day and they really sound like they know what they're doing and stuff like that. And they look at all those shiny ribbons and they command so much respect. I mean, because part of having a military forces, they must command that kind of respect from their inferiors in the service, right? Because their enlisted men could kill them all, right? So, and it's an incredibly, the whole game is lethality to its ultimate degree. So that lethality must be kept under extremely tight discipline. And then, so, exalting the leadership is a big part of that thing, right? Is that, oh my God, a general just walked in here, click your heels extra hard and stuff. But that's not how it's all supposed to work on us. We're the civilian population. There are public servants. That's it. And in fact, I always liked the way, well, I'm not sure I always liked it. It's interesting, at least. Depends on how you feel about different aspects of it. But, the way David Hackworth used to always phrase it, and he was the most decorated officer in the Vietnam War, but he was always an advocate for the enlisted man. And the way he phrased it was that the enlisted men were not the government at all. The enlisted men were the American people. The officers were the government. The officers were bureaucrats. The officers were cops, were the state. Where the enlisted men were the American people who sign up to do their duty to protect the country as part of their living in or being a citizen of a republic kind of a thing. And, a huge kind of distinction there. And in his point of view, of course, being the government meant they were the bad guys. They weren't to be trusted. They would sell out the enlisted men on a moment's notice. And that was why Hackworth's whole thing, Soldiers for the Truth, and that whole thing, in the 1990s and then the early 2000s, I think he died in like 2004 or something, unfortunately, but his whole thing was essentially like a class war. I mean, he was a right-winger, so I don't mean to make him sound too commie, but it was basically a class war of the enlisted, where he was their champion to protect them, trying to protect them from the officers who would mercilessly lie to them and use them and exploit them and throw them away with their Gulf War illnesses and God knows what. And so that's certainly my attitude about, military officers as well. And if you look at all the great leaders of our generation, they're a bunch of completely ridiculous boobs and incompetents and criminals. They're just absolutely horrible. I mean, just go down the list of the terror war generals here, which I memorized the names of all the Afghan generals. But in Iraq, and starting in Afghanistan, we had Tommy Franks, and then Casey and Sanchez and Petraeus and then carrying on to McChrystal and Odierno in Iraq. I mean, these guys are absolute failures, and they got 1 million people killed, and they got absolutely nothing for it whatsoever, as Donald Trump absolutely correctly says it. And then Petraeus and McChrystal took their public relations win, essentially, again, exploiting the Sunni Arab Iraqis turning on the Al-Qaeda guys as their own victory, and taking credit for that, and parlayed that into escalating the war in Afghanistan so they could lose that too. And then these guys are adulated as, the greatest leaders of our time. They give touring speeches for tens of thousands of dollars about the qualities of leadership and all this kind of thing. Gives speeches to the Boy Scouts of America and whatever. And they're complete. I mean, I think of Stanley McChrystal. I just picture some bum under a bridge drinking a bottle of wine out of a bag. And this guy, they got him up there like, him and Petraeus both, because it's just too impolite to point out that they lost both of those wars. And of course, Petraeus was at CIA when they did Libya and started Syria. That was his project. Running guns, that was what got the ambassador killed at Benghazi. He was embedded right in the heart of a hornet's nest, sending a bunch of Libyan veterans of Iraq War II, jihadists from Iraq War II, off to fight in Syria and take Gaddafi's guns with them.
Yeah,
that was what they were doing there.
It is funny when you think about it as, it's not like the second place team, because if you only have two sides fighting, you're also last. You're second, but you're last too. That's just going around giving speeches about this is what success looks like, guys. It is very, you think about it, like you put it in a sports context, like have a parade for like the team that got last place and had a fully defeated season. You're like, good job, guys.
Right, just like conservatives are always making fun of the kids that get trophies just for showing up and everything. And they're the biggest, these generals are the biggest, participation trophy cases. Sorry to misuse the word cases there. That you could find,
It's interesting. And of course, I think one point too about the enlistment, even when they're not, there's no draft anymore, but there is something to it that, people that are in there at that level, it doesn't necessarily mean they've decided that like the military is going to be their career, because, they're probably just, a lot of them I'm sure are just going, they're going to get school paid and they're going to, have, return to civilian life and have a normal, civilian job and whatnot. But if you're at an officer level, especially if you're at a general, you've made this your entire life's work. And of course, generals are more important when there's chaos. So there's a very, there's a significant kind of self-interest point that I think people, get missed by the prestige. But it's like, no, if you're a general, you're more important in war. So on some level, you're going to be averse to peacetime, because then, nobody cares about you in peacetime. Yeah. You're just that guy who wears a suit that's different than the other people.
And I got to tell you, man, I heard from a lot of regular folks in the last week or so that, I guess Trump pulling out of Syria is going to cause a lot of real problems. And I got into one argument like this where I said something to the effect of, what are you talking about, dude? Well, I saw on TV the generals are saying that it's, can't go now. And I'm like, man, are you kidding me? The generals said so. They don't want to have to get jobs. I mean, have you not been living in the same century as me? You think in any case, in any one of these 7 wars, that the answer is that we can't leave yet? You're telling me that someone can make you think that? Just by saying so? Well, a general says that he doesn't want to have to get a real job. So, I also am concerned that what if he's not actually good at anything except lying and killing people, What if he has to go on the dole? Like he's not already on the dole. Have you ever seen that documentary? I don't know if it's a documentary It's like on the Discovery Channel or something where they talked about all of the golf courses around the world that the generals and the admirals have. Hundreds of them all over the world in all of the finest locations. They're truly a class of Praetorians. Like, that's just like one small slice of it. How much money these guys make, and then how much money they make on all their boards of directors when they retire, quote unquote retire, and go and cash in from the arms industry that they've been paying off the whole time. It's like investing in a Social Security account, only, well, it's also a Ponzi scheme, but yeah, better for them.
Well, and they'd have a pension too, so really they don't need to do any of that because you get your full pension pretty early if you were in the military. But, well, should we pivot over to Afghanistan?
Yeah, let's talk about Afghanistan.
So my understanding is that, so he's announced that so this one I feel like is a little less certain than the Syria pullout. I mean, the Syria pullout's not certain either, but the Afghanistan one is more shaky ground, as it were. So his plan is to pull out half of the troops. And so I think the numbers I've seen is he'd get it down to 7,000. But of course, that's only a little bit lower than what he started at, because he started at 10, he escalated 4, and now it'd be drawing down half of that. So I think people are making it out to be a little bit more significant than maybe it. I mean, obviously I'm happy if it happens, and I hope it does. But I guess to start off, do you think it's going to happen? I mean, what's your crystal ball saying? The best guess you have?
Well, I mean, they're talking about a drawdown by summer of half of them, so I don't know. But, I mean, I'll tell you, first off, unlike Syria, they cannot spin Afghanistan as any kind of success. You know, what's going to happen is the Taliban are going to declare, which they already have, really, but it's going to be accepted that they are the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan, and they're going to have their own nation in at least half the country. And then I think it's safe to predict the worst, that the civil war will continue and that they'll sack the capital city and will continue waging the war until they can try to consolidate power over the rest of the country. And I say that because I don't think that the other side, the weaker side that America's been supporting this whole time, will negotiate with them. I don't think they have much room to negotiate. I don't think they're going to say, okay, Taliban, you've won on the battlefield this whole time. Let's bring you into the parliament and give you a good 40% of the representatives here, and then we'll have a democratic system now, like it works so great. That's not going to happen. And so you're going to have a major contest between armed militias, and it's going to be like the 1990s, probably a goddamn catastrophe. And I think everybody on the power side of this knows that. And that's the real problem that they're facing, is they know that if we leave in 2030, it's going to be the same thing. American power, they could escalate. It would probably take another few thousand troops. But they could escalate force and try to hold the Taliban back. I mean, as it is right now, the Taliban don't rule the provincial capitals. They rule much of the country, but they don't take the provincial capitals because the Americans can still bring enough air power down on them to make them regret it and drive back out. So what happens is they'll like take a city like Ghazni just to prove a point and then retreat, because it makes no sense for them to really hold it, you know? So the Americans can keep it like that, which is, it's not really a stalemate. I mean, it's still, the initiative is with them by far. But, you know, that could probably pretty much hold for years. Maybe take another few thousand troops to keep it a stalemate. And they could pretty much keep it like that. And the Americans can, without too much force, can pretty much hold the line, I think. They have enough of an Afghan army that in the worst case type emergencies, the Americans can come in and back them up. That's how it's been anyway. But all that just to say, though, that I think everyone understands that when the Americans are gone, then that game is over. That the government that they've created there and the army that they've created there cannot stand on its own. There's no money to do it. I mean, even if it all was really working great, which it's absolutely not, it cost, the government of the country. Well, I forget all my statistics now. I have to go back and check. I was going to say the cost of the government is virtually the same as GDP. It's pretty close. It just the economy of Afghanistan absolutely cannot sustain that government and that army. And so I think, the best thing for Trump to do, and it's not too late for him to do this, if only because he's Donald Trump, so what the hell, is he needs to say that, look, this is Bush and Obama's fault, okay? The Taliban didn't really attack us. And the broader Pashtun population of Afghanistan, these tribal, kind of backwoods hillbillies here, they're not our enemies. They didn't really do anything to us. And Bush and Obama were wrong to try to pacify them, to wage this pacification campaign. That's stupid. Bush is dumb and Obama's weak and cowardly and pathetic, and I hate him. And so this is all their fault, and it's not my fault. And in fact, when I came in, I gave the generals, Mattis and McMaster, another year to give it a try, to have their escalation, to hold the line, to make an improvement. And we massively increased airstrikes, and we reduced the rules of engagement to escalate the war against the Taliban to see what we could do. We sent the Marines back down to Helmand, and it didn't work. And Mattis and McMaster had their chance, and when I called them on it, or when I called Mattis on it and said, look, you had your chance, it didn't work, he quit rather than take responsibility for his failure. So this is all Bush and Obama and Mattis and McMaster's fault, not mine. So saith Donald Trump, so say we all, and then what? And then who's going to really object to that other than the national security establishment? And if Donald Trump would say to the American people for real, hey, look at me, I'm ending wars. No wonder everybody in power hates me. It's not because I'm rude. It's not because I'm mean to the Mexican kids and whatever. It's because I'm ending the wars. If he would frame it like that, he might survive politically.
Yeah.
And you know what? Here's the other thing. He's got so many wars to end that he could end a war every few months and drag it out till 2020 election, man. He could be, making peace with the Ayatollah by the election in 2020.
Just what if, wouldn't it be, that'd be an interesting about face. I don't want to get too hopeful. But, because the normal strategy, you have a personal scandal or something that goes badly, you start a war somewhere. Seems like it could work just as well because it dominates the media landscape just as effectively if you're trying to pull out. They're just criticizing you instead of singing your praises. So I guess that's a little different.
You know what? We're kind of running out of places to start new ones, though, and Iran is too big. Oh. I mean, ultimately, why they attack Iraq? Because they couldn't attack Iran, right? So they settled because, as Wolfowitz said, Iraq is doable.
Yeah.
So, I guess they could attack, I don't know,
so
China.
Let's hope not. Okay, so kind of getting back to the power dynamics within Afghanistan. So the Taliban, they're the Pashtun and the Taliban. Most of the Taliban are Pashtun, probably, ethnically.
Yes, although actually I read a thing that said they're trying to recruit outside of their sect more and more. There's this lady, she's really smart. She wrote, her name is Ashley Jackson. And I tried to get her on the show, man. I need to try again more. She wrote this thing for Foreign Policy, The Taliban's Fight for Hearts and Minds. And she wrote this other thing that was for the Organization for Development, something, I forgot, man. But it's really great, and it's about essentially the Taliban's counterinsurgency strategy. Oh, it's Life Under the Taliban Shadow Government is what it's called. It came out last June. Life Under the Taliban Shadow Government. And essentially, you think about how ridiculous it is that the Americans would implement this counterinsurgency strategy, this Maoist hearts and minds, people's warfare Hey, it didn't work for the French in Algeria or Vietnam or for us in Vietnam. Let's try it here. It'll be great. Kind of strategy. But if you actually are from the people, like the Taliban are, they're not aliens from Mars. They are the men of the region. Not all of them, obviously, but that's where they're from. Then it makes sense to fight. It made sense for Mao, didn't it? To fight the people's war, to basically integrate the people into your war and integrate your war into the way of life of the people as much as you can to make it all very inevitable, to replace the current security force with your own power in its place. And so the idea that a bunch of North Americans are going to implement something like that in Pashtunistan is the most ridiculous thing in the world. And, you may remember, and it's in the book if you don't remember, they tried their one test case was in this tiny little farming community of Marja. And the whole thing was a total disaster. And then that was it. They said they were going to do it in Kandahar City, was going to be the showcase. They never even tried it in Kandahar City. This whole thing is ridiculous. Anyway, but the point is, it makes sense for the Taliban. And so they got smart. Instead of just destroying everything that the Americans and the government built, they just took it all over. So in their areas are probably the only places where the schools the Americans built didn't fall down, because the Taliban took them over and maintains the upkeep, and in some places even lets girls go to school, but there's a Taliban appointed teacher. And in some places you have the mayor, the governor, the police chief. They're all part of the government run out of Kabul, and they're collecting a paycheck that's the money that came right out of your paycheck. But they really work for the Taliban. They're appointed by the Taliban. And the Americans are just paying the salaries of their enemies' government. And they've come and they're just taking over all of the bureaucracy, taking over the police functions, and taking over, instead of just having a competing shadow government, they're usurping the government that the Americans have made as well. And rather than just fighting, they're focusing especially on providing the goods and services that win them the confidence of the people. And so who are you going to trust? Some white kid from Iowa who's pointing a gun at you, who obviously doesn't know the first thing about you or care about you or couldn't possibly know, and neither does his commanding officer? Or you're the actual men from the community who are creating this, parallel set of institutions right there. And I'm not saying that the Taliban is ideal. And in fact, the history of this goes back to the Soviets, where the Soviets killed so many of the tribal leaders that the actual structure of tribal power was shattered. And so that was when the worst of the warlords that the CIA had supported, people like Haqqani and Hekmatyar, came and lorded it over the people in the very worst way. And so then the Taliban came after the Mujahideen. They brought under their religious authority. They came and brought law and order and put the criminals in their place and what have you. But so Taliban religious rule is not the norm for Afghanistan or even for Pashtunistan. They had this tribal system that Islam was a part of it. And then ironically, as Anand Gopal has written, actually these extremely strict Hanafi, Sunni, Taliban religious nuts, when they were in charge in Afghanistan in the 90s and into 2001, that they were actually far more liberal than the traditional Pashtunwali tribal code. And so the degree to which, I guess is the best way to put it, the degree to which women are treated as merely chattel property of their husbands and brothers and fathers and so forth was far worse under the ancient tribal code than Islam, which is actually this progressive force that came in and said, for example, on what I think you and I would understand as one of the absolutely most essential questions is whether women can own property, whether they can inherit property, buy and sell property. And under the Taliban, their interpretation, I don't know anything about the Quran, but their interpretation of the Quran says that, of course, women can do that. Whereas the ancient code says no. Oh, by the way, I just thought of this and I have to bring it up. Is that Ann Jones says, and I trust her journalism, that the police under the American government in Afghanistan spend more time chasing runaway women and girls than any other activity. That's their main job, is they're slave catchers, essentially.
Well, and I guess to go along with that, isn't the impetus for the Taliban's kind of rise to power? I don't know if this probably wasn't the only thing, but wasn't kind of the tipping point was that they overthrew a warlord who had, like a pet child, like boy slave that he was molesting.
Well, yeah, it was boys and women. Yeah, they were being kidnapped and raped in Kandahar City. And people came to Mullah Omar's group and said, would you please intervene here and do something about this? You're our only hope, kind of thing. At least that's the narrative. But you know what? When I was researching the book, I read that in a bunch of different places, and they told different versions of virtually the exact same story.
Wow. Yeah.
And, I think one of them, I think it was Ahmed Rashid, who talked about that there was a record, I think, of the radio broadcasts. Someone had transcribed the radio broadcasts from right at that time where they were announcing what was going on. And basically what they did was they went to all the criminal groups and said, you're going to either join our police force and obey the law, or we're going to put you guys up against the wall and shoot you. This is over. It's the new order under the Taliban, and your time of criminality has come to an end. So, that also meant that a lot of really bad guys became cops under the Taliban. And so it was still pretty rough. Anand Gopal in his book, he talks about this guy, Mr. Cable. That's what they call him because that's what he liked to beat people with, who was, went from a Taliban enforcer to another kind during the war. But yeah, I mean, they really were authoritarians, if not totalitarians. I don't guess they had the power to really enforce totalitarianism, but they're pretty damn strict, that's for sure. But
it's just
their leadership, they're corrupt because they're a state, but they didn't tolerate. I don't think they tolerated much of just kind of the petty corruption on the lower level. I think they really made it where you could go out at night and you could, you know what I mean? They brought law and order, sort of like the mob in South Florida, where you can leave your door unlocked because they have a real monopoly on crime around here, and they don't do home invasions at night of innocent people. But there are no other criminals around here because they don't mess around on this turf, Well, that was back in the day. I don't know how it is now.
No, but yeah, the point stands. It's an interesting, kind of just the standard kind of problem of comparing things to the wrong. People look at how Afghanistan was under that, and of course it was terrible, but that doesn't, the question is compared to what, and if what came before was actually worse than that, then it can make sense why they would enjoy some degree of popular support at that time, just because they're, less worse, as you would say, than the terrible form of brutality that existed prior to that.
Even when they took the capital city of Kabul, which was a very metropolitan place with all different Hazaras and Tajiks and Uzbeks and Turkmen and different people there, they welcomed the Taliban. And this would be like a redneck militia from North Carolina taking Washington, D.C. And then imagine the people, the white, rich, power monger part of Washington, D.C. in the middle. Imagine them... or imagine maybe DC in the best comparison. Anyway, imagine the people of DC welcoming a right-wing militia from North Carolina, because that was how corrupt the Trump regime had gotten, that they would take, at least these right-wing redneck hillbilly dudes come in. At least they really believe in law and order. They really believe in the law. And they're not going to put up with how bad things have gotten, essentially. That was how it was. where they were welcomed, at least at first, as long as they were getting rid of Massoud and the Northern Alliance, who are the guys that, essentially the same team that America's put in power ever since then. I mean, ever since, that was in 96 when America was backing the Taliban, but I mean, ever since 2001 when we turned on them.
Mm-hmm. So what are your thoughts on the peace talks? I know I've read that they're ongoing, and I think they're direct between the U.S. and the Taliban right now. Do you think those have a high chance of success? Do they seem more serious this time around than they have been previously?
I don't think that the Americans have any cards to play. And, if they did have any, which they didn't, then Obama just played them too soon anyway. Look, we're leaving. I mean, what is Zalmay Khalilzad telling them? Look, man, we're going, but we're just saying what on the way out. And the Taliban are saying, and in fact, they're not even doing that. I mean, this has been going on for months and months, and then I just read this thing. I hope I saved the footnote for this. I think I did. Where someone inside the government wrote this article about how, look, we're only having talks toward the having of talks. We're only having talks to see if we can have talks. And we'd like to include the Afghan government, and the Taliban don't want to talk to the Afghan government, and they don't want to talk to us. They have not changed, just as I said in my book a year and a half ago. They have not changed their position, and they're not going to change their position, that they have nothing to talk about until after we leave. So that's why I say in my book, we should not negotiate with them. We should just go. Because I can't imagine a situation where the Americans say to them, okay, go ahead and destroy everything we've built here. But that's what they're going to do. And the Americans can't stop them from doing that. I mean, if it was my government right now and I was the president, I would be saying to the Taliban, guys, just take Pashtunistan. Declare, not full independence, but full-scale autonomy and federalism, and make a peace deal, essentially, with the current parliament in Kabul, but stay out of Kabul. Don't continue the war. Go ahead and let the government of the north of the country try to hold itself together as best it can. And we're leaving now, but you guys, this is a great time for you to cease fire. I mean, that would be my advice, but I don't have any reason to think that they would listen to that. I mean, if they're smart, they would remember what a difficult time they had trying to consolidate power of the whole country last time. They took the capital city in 96 or 94. I think 96. But then they still weren't done consolidating power over the whole country when America invaded in 2001. And we're still fighting the Civil War. And then look how much trouble the government we've created in their place has had taking control over their part of the country this whole time. So why keep fighting a civil war over control over the central government when the central government doesn't have that much power anyway? And you don't even have to break the country apart and have, full secession if that is too much for people, but just have full autonomy and federalism and what have you, this kind of thing. I don't know what cards the Americans had to play. If Donald Trump isn't willing, and I really hope he's not, if he's not willing to continue to pick up the tab for this and continue to have Americans out there fighting in Helmand Province and Nangarhar Province for this, then, I think the best thing to do would be to just, give some constructive advice like that and leave and just say, we're not going to bribe you. We're not promising anybody any more money. We're not, making any more obligations. We're just going. And honestly, not to be a horrible cynic about it, because like I said, I think it'll probably be horrible. But the fact of the matter is, if Bush and Obama built a project there, this so-called federal government there, that cannot stand without American support after 17 years, then that already right there is the definition of a failed project, right? You can just, I guess if Max Boot would hear, he would say, nuh-uh. If in 30 years it still can't stand on its own, then maybe you got me. But no, I say
Now it'll be
17
Germany.
years, and I'm pretty sure 17 is enough. And I think that it's pretty. It shows that if we leave in 2030 or whatever year, it'd be the same problem. So, but then again, the last time the Taliban took Kabul and tried to consolidate power over the whole country, America, Saudi, and Pakistan supported them. So America could definitely lean on our Pakistani and Saudi allies to lean on the Pakistanis too. I mean, I don't think the Saudis ever do what the Americans want when it's contrary to their interests. But I think people are tired of fighting too, man. I think there are a lot of people in the country who would like to have a ceasefire and a peace deal here. So I don't know.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going to go, because I definitely read articles to that effect. I mean, you have, at this point, it's got to be 2-3 generations of Afghanis who they've never known anything but some version of wartime.
Yeah, my whole lifetime.
It's an amazing. I mean, obviously we have no concept of what that's like. It's like, yeah, I mean, America's been at war for most of my life, but it's not like that. I experience anything about that in my day-to-day life. I just read articles on antiwar.com and get irate about what's happening to other people, but it really doesn't, but to them, it's, a force destabilizing their entire society. So you'd think it might almost, just because of that, be in the Taliban's political interest that, we got to have some peace around here for a little while.
Yeah. And you know what?
So
Mullah
maybe
Omar's
it's not
dead.
quite as bad.
I mean, the new guy is apparently a lot more sophisticated than him, and more sophisticated than his predecessor, Massoud, who was very incompetent and divisive. And so, I don't know. Maybe they could make a deal. Maybe if the Americans got out of the way, maybe the Taliban, there's a possibility that they would be open to compromise with some of the other factions and willing to live with limitations on their power in other people's parts of the country and this kind of thing. I don't know, man. I mean, I don't want to get caught being optimistic about it, because I'm really not. It's not a situation like Syria where when Trump says ISIS is defeated, the Islamic State is no more, and the last of the mopping up can be handled by Iran and Hezbollah. He's right. So no problem there. I'm not worried about a land bridge in Syria. I don't give a damn about that, So, and neither does anybody else except the real war hawks. But in Afghanistan, there's a bad comeuppance coming, man. It's like a market crash. It's like a giant bubble, and it's going to pop. And so I don't know. There's no.
And I guess
they always try to inflate more and create a soft landing, but it never does work, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I guess the only, it's not really a saving grace, but kind of, the positive thing about the Afghanistan situation from, a purely kind of national interest type of perspective is that even if Afghanistan did collapse into chaos, which, as you're saying, that's smart money's on that outcome, the Taliban never was a, international terrorist threat, and their beef with the Americans or that the Americans are there. And so there's really no reason to expect that if the Americans left, that then you'd have a situation where they're suddenly trying to plot transnational terrorist plots against the U.S.
Yeah, and by the way, the Islamic State there is also just local Pashtun militia guys. They started out as Tariqi Taliban fighters from Pakistan who fled Obama's Pakistan war to safe haven in Afghanistan. How do you like that? And then declared themselves the Islamic State back in, 2013 or 2014. And then mostly now I think their rank and file are just made up of disaffected factions of the Taliban and that kind of thing. But
is the Taliban at war with them? Do they have the same kind of relationship?
Yeah, they fight all the time.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the other thing, is we should get out of their way and let the Taliban go ahead and finish them off. If people want to pretend that anyone who uses the brand name Islamic State is really a threat, then could recreate the awakening thing. Hey, Taliban, we'll leave you alone as long as you kill the ISIS for us. Okay. And what's funny, man, is not funny, is actually bad. It was an American was killed, and they reported he was killed in fighting with Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. And I saw that reported over and over again in 3 or 4 different places. that it was just taken at face value that someone at the Pentagon or someone in Afghanistan in the military claimed that Al-Qaeda was present at this fight there, but with no explanation whatsoever as to who it was he's talking about and why it was that we should believe that that's true, or what that even is supposed to mean. I mean, it could be he's just some bum and he meant to say Taliban, but he doesn't know the damn difference after all this time, I don't know.
Yeah.
But I don't believe that it was any Egyptian friend of Zawahiri that was firefighting with Americans in Afghanistan, if that was what he meant.
Well, and if it was, then that would just tell us that, wow, 17 years and you didn't even accomplish the one job that you said you were trying to do.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah, that's why we got to do it more still.
Look, we haven't fixed anything. We must stay. God,
there could be a land bridge. Yeah, they're worried the Chinese are going to build a land bridge across Eurasia. This Belt and Road Initiative which to me, I mean, seriously, man, unless you're some kind of right-wing or left-wing reactionary paranoiac, freakazoid, but if you're just a regular human, you shouldn't have to be a libertarian. Just any regular human. Either that they want to build a highway, a railway, a fiber optic path, whatever, this kind of thing, from Shanghai to Lisbon. That doesn't sound like the greatest invention in the history of humanity ever to you? That you would have that? A superhighway across of all of Eurasia? I mean, just think of the possibilities. And, anyways, man, I just, that to me is what, well, it's one thing about all this. It's just what a poor sport America is. We win the Cold War and we're a total poor sport about it. We got to rub their nose in it, do everything we can. All these color-coded revolutions and NATO expansion and all of this stuff. We got to dominate Eurasia. The Chinese abandon communism and adopt fascism instead. And, at least they can feed their people now. And they are freer in a lot of ways. Certainly compared to how it was under Mao. And we made them our best trading partner and basically friend, right? We don't have any real fights with China or anything. We got to manufacture a fight to have with them. And then, so why should it be a problem? I mean, do people just assume that the Chinese are, for the first time in 1,000 years or 2,000 years or something, they're going to adopt a giant westward expansionist policy and try to, conquer all Eurasia? Use that highway to send the PLA to liberate them all? Or, I mean, this is all just, and I guess it could be used for that, but, in one context or another, but it just seems like obviously the purpose is for trade. And it just seems like, the overall GDP of the world would go up by however many trillions of dollars a year for everyone to share with an advancement like that. And the Americans are the ones standing there going, no, we have to, no matter how many local illiterate, tribesmen and their baby daughters we have to bomb to stay in Afghanistan, we have to stay in Afghanistan to prevent that. Because that's who we are, USA, the people who did the genocide in Yemen, the people who are willing to continue to kill Pashtuns forever in order to block China from building a land bridge to Portugal. It's sick, man. It's stupid, embarrassing, and horrible.
It is. And it's amazing, too, that, kind of the default position, whether it's right or left, because the only reason you would oppose that type of thing, I mean, it's not a good reason, but the only coherent reason that you can even have for it is, then China's economy is going to advance because more people are going to want to trade with them because it's going to facilitate that. And they never finish the rest of the sentence. And the answer is, like you're saying, GDP of everybody would go up. Goods are going to be cheaper. Everybody's standard of living is going to improve, including in places where it's a lot lower than ours is right now. And it's
even
great
that
for everyone.
commie from U2, Bono, came out and goes, you know what? I've been all around the world, and it's capitalism that makes people able to afford food to eat on a regular basis and, a clean place to go to the bathroom and stuff. So, yeah, hate to admit it, guys, because, But here's a guy who's like Mr. Human Rights, charity, celebrity, interventionist. Do you ever see the South Park making fun of him? And I hate you two so much, too. So I have such a bias against that guy. But he's like, you know what? It seems like if we're trying to abolish hunger, we need more trade. We need more people in business feeding other people, man. That's how you do it.
Yeah. And it's just interesting that the default position of everybody, even though, we're all bombarded with GDP statistics if you pay attention at all, you're going to hear GDP numbers and, it's the exception when it's going down. But it's not like, oh, America had 2% GDP growth this year. Therefore, Kenya had negative 2% because we had to take it from somebody. Everybody knows that's not how it works. Everybody. Because that never happened. It's the exception to the rule that it collapses. But then it's like, but wait, then that means your zero-sum theory that's underlying all of your stupid ideas is clearly wrong.
Exactly.
Because we are all looking at the same thing, and it never happens.
Right. Yeah, people talk about, the capitalists hoarding all the wealth. Like, yeah, we all started out with 11 gazillion trillion dollars, and then, like, the white guys and the Jews hoarded it all and kept it all from everyone else or something like that. When the reality is, no, it used to be that everyone was going hungry. And then fewer and fewer people were going hungry as more and more people had property rights and consistently productive agriculture, Yeah.
All I heard from that was that you hate equality because there was equality when everybody was poor and starving.
Yeah.
I knew that about you in the first place, so I'll let it go. Well, sir, should we wrap it up there? What do you think? About 2 hours, I think.
I can't help but think I'm forgetting something, but oh well. Who cares? I'm sure people probably had enough by now.
Yeah, we're gonna
give them a respite.
Uploading this. Yeah. All right. Well, yeah, we'll have to do another one of these again soon. We did have a couple other topics that we'll get to next time, but they're not going to be covered quickly. So yeah, let's save it. And do we need to do a little outro to make it smooth, or not really worried about it?
Yeah, I think this is it.
Okay. All right.
Hey, man. Well, have a good night, dude. Thanks very much, Eric.
Yeah, a lot of fun talking to you as always.